GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and for our fourth segment of today's show, a little bit of an unusual one. We're concluding our positional rankings this week with the tight ends rather than the defenses, as we are having a short week here on the show and the network. But I would have it no other way because I love talking about the tight end position. Like I said, one of my favorite positions just because of its volatility and just because of the depth and experience we have in this position. I was talking about before the season how we're finally going to see a little bit of a split between a younger generation and an older generation, where it's the Kittles and Kelce's versus the Porters and Kincaids of the world. We haven't necessarily seen. What we've seen is an amalgamation of different talents, either unsung heroes or established veterans, really stand out this year. It is made for an exciting analysis each and every week of the tight end position as I try and decipher who to choose for my rankings. But all four of these guys, potentially 3 out of the 4 guys you would never have thought would end up on my list in terms of who I think could be viable starts in certain matchups. But that's the depth of the position, like I say, and it just makes it that much more exciting. If you are skeptical, let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your guys' opinions about these positional rankings. Without further ado, let's just jump right into them. Starting off, as always, not always, because this guy wasn't expected to be here, with a guy who I feel like needs to become much more of a focal point for this team down the stretch, because they really need someone who can get physical in the pass game. Someone who kind of simplifies things a little bit more for the pass game as well, most importantly, because right now I feel like they're in a weird place, a rocky place, and there is a need to expand a little further, and this guy can really calm it down. So look for Dalton Schultz to get going against the Jaguars in a nicely contested AFC South battle, because the Jaguars, it seems like they're playing out the string of the season here, but they're still going to try and play with as much pride. This could be their Super Bowl, much like the Browns' snow game was against the Steelers 2 weeks ago. But Dalton Schultz is a very unusual case study as a tight end, at the tight end position, because he plays for a team that really doesn't predicate itself on needing him that much. But in situations such as these, right, where you're trying to force your hand a little bit if you're the Texans on the offensive side of the football, you need a guy like Dalton Schultz to really calm everything down. He only had 4 fantasy points against Tennessee, when he could have had much more, what turned out to be a trap game for the Texans. And this one, if they want to win this one, which is, again, it's a trap game in the AFC South, you're going to need to win with physicality. Because remember, last time these two teams played, the Texans actually needed a walk-off touchdown to win. And if you don't want that to happen again, and you want a comfortable win, as you should imagine they want, against a team that they should beat handily 9 times out of 10, you just need to bring the physicality. And they just have it week in, week out. And that's what's led to now. And so that's why I think Dalton Schultz's importance is going to shine through for this Texans team, whether he does perform or not. And so I think that's the perfect way to get him going against a divisional opponent that you can beat by a lot against the Jaguars here, to really kind of jumpstart this kick into the playoffs. Because should you get there, you want to acquit yourselves nicely again, much like you did last year. So look for Dalton Schultz to be a big part of the Texans' plans down the stretch. And the second guy, another really unexpected guy, a guy I'm all too familiar with for his time at Seattle, now plying his trade in LA, could be a very interesting guy to monitor down the stretch here. My man, Will Dissly, going up against the Falcons' pass defense. We always say here on the show, is atrocious. He only had 8.7 fantasy points against Baltimore, but it was a nice showing for him. Because look, in his time at Seattle, I can tell you this much: he wasn't a pass-catching tight end. He was more of an inline guy, a blocker type. He actually caught Geno Smith's first ever touchdown pass back in that game against the Broncos. But that's basically all he was famous for at Seattle. He had some nice plays, but overall was mainly our blocking tight end. But now in Los Angeles, he's a man reborn in Jim Harbaugh's system, catching passes, beautiful seam routes in the red zone. And I just feel like, he's transformed into this player who's now much more mature at the position, no matter whether or not he is blocking or he's needed to catch a pass. That's the difference between what I think about in terms of development in a tight end. If you just are more of a physical tight end who's not necessarily going to help a team in terms of your catching prowess, then you're not necessarily going to develop into someone who can catch the pass. And Will Dissly was willing to do that. Because in this Chargers offense, yes, a lot of the time he is going to be blocking more often than not for this run game. But I do feel like he is someone who is more than capable of making an impact through the air. And we've seen it especially in the red zone where he's really shined, both actually in Seattle and LA, if anything. And against the Falcons, this is an opponent that you can really go hog wild if you're Justin Herbert against. And so that's why Will Dissly is making a shocking appearance on this list. I would never have thought that I would be considering Will Dissly as a fantasy start any given week from a fantasy perspective and a standpoint, but this is how it is. I now view him as someone who is a competent pass-catching tight end for a Los Angeles Chargers team that could really diversify the pass game down the stretch here. And so look for him to be a very sneaky weapon. So Will Dissly makes my list as my second player. And the third player, a guy who became familiar with, has been quiet the past couple of weeks, but against a, shall we say, bizarre defense to really figure out, he can have a nice day again. Cade Otton. This was someone who had a little bit of a breakout after, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down, and now that Mike Evans is back, we're expecting him to go back to being more of a blocking tight end, not necessarily catching many passes. But I feel like in a potential trap game for the Bucs against the Panthers, how they're playing, Cade Otton can make a huge difference, because I feel like if the Bucs are going to make that run into the playoffs and get in and try and go up against the NFC's best, they're going to need to retain the ball. And that's what I love about Cade Otton. He's not necessarily the biggest route running threat, but he is someone who knows certain situations. He knows what he needs to do when he's asked to catch the football, whether it be in short yardage situations or whether it be, in the middle of the field exploiting zone coverage. He just is someone who's always going to be reliable, especially, if they can't get Mike Evans going like they want to in this offense. And he's a very nice balance what they already have in the run game as well. If they're doing really well from a running perspective, then that's where Cade Otton can also really shine as well. So look for them against the Panthers, potentially in a game that could be close in the stretch for him to really stand out in this one as well. I really think that this is a Bucs team that, all they have to do to really get into the postseason or just stay in the race is just play like they play all year. Play physical, play rough football, and it comes down to guys like Cade Otton really standing out and making a difference. So look for him to have another nice game yet again for this Bucs offense. And the last guy, this is a long shot, but he's always going to be someone who we have to talk about, kind of that generational gap here, kind of getting into that old guard, but still playing like one of the elite tight ends in all of football. Gonna be a very difficult day for him, though, going up against the Bills. But I still think that he might be one of the better football players on the field in this game. When you're one of the best on the field at any given game, chances are you have a strong shot at success, and that is George Kittle. I can't deny George Kittle. He is a fantastic football player, no matter what he's asked to do. Plays with so much passion, so much grit, even in tough situations. And this might be the toughest of his career. He's 5-6, going into the snowy environs of Buffalo to take on Buffalo, who's riding high with one of the best wins in the National Football League this season against the Chiefs. And you might not have your starting quarterback. Your defense has lost its star player. And right now, you have to really step up and carry this team. And it may not look pretty at times for the 49ers, but when and if you get George Kittle to football, chances are good things will happen. Because look, I know that at the end of the day, the 49ers probably aren't going to win this game. And it could get very ugly in terms of how these superstar players for the 49ers look because of the fact that it could be Brandon Allen from the football. But let's be clear here. This is still a 49ers offense that is meant to operate no matter what. When adversity hits, it can operate at a high level. We've seen it with all of these players. And it's getting to that tipping point, right, where you have to have concern for certain elements of this offense should injuries start stockpiling again. But you still have McCaffrey, you still have Samuel, you still have Jennings, and you have George Kittle. And if you utilize all of them effectively, if you're Kyle Shanahan, then chances are you're still in football games. That last game against the Green Bay Packers was an anomaly in my opinion, because I feel like, they were just in such a low place after that emotional loss to Seattle that they really couldn't muster a fight. And it could have been the same if Brock Purdy were there. So that's just how it is in the situation right now for the 49ers. But when I think about this team, I think about the pieces it can utilize to try and stay in this football game against Buffalo. George Kittle is going to be a huge aspect to how I think the 49ers will try and stay in this one. Because if he gets going, then I truly feel like they do have a chance to keep it a little bit closer. Maybe not, as close as, say, 10 to 15 points, but, in that region. Just because I just think that it's too much to say that these players will falter just because they don't have someone operating them. Brock Purdy isn't the end-all, be-all here. Let's be honest here. So that means that these skill position players still can shine no matter what. And so look for George Kittle in this role to really step up and be a vocal leader in this matchup and potentially try and make this game a little bit more respectable than a lot of people are thinking it will be should Brock Purdy not play. But looking at this list, I think it's pretty fair to say that this is a highly unexpected one at that. But let me know what you think about it in the comments, because I think all four of these guys, especially George Kittle, are elite tight ends in their own right, no matter how they play the position. And so I want to give each of them their flowers. But coming up to conclude today's show in the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, it is, as always, my weekly shadow report, the key wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define the fantasy football weekend. We'll be right back after this break to conclude today's show.